All right. Thanks everybody for being patient with us while we're working through some logistics. So welcome everyone. I'm Krissa Bean. I'm the Marketing and Events Coordinator at Chelsea Groton Bank, and welcome to Grants Writing 101. For over 167 years, Chelsea Groton has been committed to doing all we can to help customers and communities succeed in ways. And we're thrilled to offer fun and educational programming virtually and in person so we can stay connected with the members of our community. Be sure to check out chelseagroton.com/Chelsea University or follow us on social media to see some of the great upcoming classes we're having. Pleased to introduce Jessica Morozowich, professional grant writer and program manager for the Southeastern Connecticut Cultural Coalition's Funding Booster Program. Just some housekeeping again, we're going to be recording this event, so we've got everybody on mute and we've asked you to turn your cameras off. If you have any questions during the program, please feel free to put them in the chat box. I'll let Jessica know. And we've also left time in the program for questions at the end where you can take your camera on, put it back on, take your mute off, and we can ask some questions for Jessica. So we hope you enjoyed tonight's program, and I'm going to pass it over to Jessica to get started.
Thank you, guys. So at any time, for the people online, if you cannot hear me, you start not being able to hear me, please just pop off mute, and because we can't see you, and let us know so we can make those adjustments. So we're going to hold all questions until the end, but please put them in the chat so that you don't forget them. Also, don't feel like you have to take 1.5 million notes. You will get this entire PowerPoint as a PDF after the presentation. You'll also get a link to the recording so you can scroll back and watch it as you need to. It is a lot of information. People tend to get a little glassy eyed. That is normal. Have your juice or cookie sustenance so you can keep going. And let's get started. So, all the things you wish you knew before applying for grants. Again, this is a workshop created for the Funding Booster Program of the Cultural Coalition. And the program aims to improve the arts and culture sector's ability to apply for and win grants, and to increase the state and regional federal funding for the creative sector, specifically in Eastern Connecticut. All right. So as we get started, guess who has upcoming grant deadlines? Chelsea Groton, which is one of the reasons why this is very timely. We're getting you ready for their upcoming grant cycle, which their deadline's April 15th. The grants will be reviewed in May. And as you can see, you will be eligible if you are a nonprofit, a governmental unit, and their program areas are there, as well as their grant range, which is at $500 to $5,000. And Chelsea has always been a phenomenal supporter of arts and culture, and their grants from the assessments we've done at the Cultural Coalition have always been ranked as some of the easiest to apply for. Regarding just how cumbersome the application process is, Chelsea is always ranked very high. So we're going to start by discussing some challenges that are facing cultural nonprofits, specifically post-COVID, but this is relative to all nonprofits, not just cultural nonprofits. So first off, it's staying relevant. So are you ready? R-E-A-D-I. That means, are you relevant, equitable, accessible, diverse, and inclusive? Does your mission and programming relate directly to your community and the community that you want to attract that you may not be reaching? Are your programs responsive to the current needs around you? And are you thinking outside of the box regarding new ways to expand and grow? Or are you committed to just being static and unchanging? You want to try to be mindful of the future that you're co-creating with others. And we will go into each one of these in a little more detail. Competition. Everybody has tons of competition right now. And the pandemic has really highlighted, though, how meaningful cultural programming is and community programs to us. They were what kept us connected while we were all stuck at home. So, but how do you stay competitive, and how do you know what funders are going to be prioritizing in the upcoming funding season? Finally, a financial security. I'm sorry that some of this got cut off, but remember, don't worry, you're going to get it for yourself. So how do we survive with all of these extreme challenges that we're facing today? How do we plan programming when we don't know if things are going to be shut down? How do we ask donors to give when you have this constant uncertain future? So again, these are all things that we're going to look at in a little more detail. So let's talk READI. The READI framework is something that comes directly from the Connecticut Office of the Arts, which is housed under the Department of Economic and Community Development. So this is a framework coming directly from the state and is being pushed out to the entire state, and all the ways that they're looking at funding, all of their grant priorities are now going to be shifting to focus on this framework. It's been in place for about 4 years, but in the past 2 years, they have really put a concerted effort into working with organizations. They want to see that you are making a genuine effort to address their READI framework. And so whenever we start talking about DEI, the very first thing we want to do is talk about shared terminology, because all of us have different definitions for these terms. So whenever you're having conversations, whether internally in your organization or with your community, you want to make sure you're talking about the same thing. So the definitions of relevance, equity, access, diversity, and inclusion, as is referred to by the Connecticut Office of the Arts and the Department of Economic and Community Development, is here. So you can use that as a strong basis for your shared terminology within your organization moving forward. So why is this framework so important? What has, we all know the the turmoil that's happened in our world and the focus on DEI and why it has become so important. But why for your business, why for you as an organization, is this something that you really need to be paying attention to? So READI is important for your business. Being ready is good for your bottom line. You actually are going to expand access to your programs and services. You're going to boost your participation, your earned and contributed revenue sources, and you're going to make your projects and your missions more competitive in your funding areas, because the whole purpose of broadening your inclusiveness and your equitability in your area. So for your mission, being ready is good because you are a gatekeeper. You are in a position of power if you are an organization, and you have to acknowledge that you are in a position to either make your programs more accessible or continue having bars and barriers that you may not even know of to your programming that may be reducing people's likelihood of participating. So first things first, you need to acknowledge that responsibility of you as a gatekeeper, and then work to create a more equitable future for your programs and your community. And then finally, for your community, being ready is important because it's good, you're more accurately serving your whole community. Again, you're addressing those bars and barriers, or you're reducing them so that you can better serve the community that you're in. All right, so where can we start? When we talk DEI, people get very overwhelmed. There's a ton of excellent information out there, but it's difficult to know just where to start. So first off, you really want to make a personal commitment. None of us are going to become DEI specialists overnight or make any of our boards or programs more diverse immediately. Connecticut is a highly segregated state. We have towns in Connecticut that are 99.9% white. So you're not going to diversify your board immediately overnight. That's something that funders acknowledge. But it needs to be a long-term strategic change, and that's when the change is done properly. This is slow, methodical work that takes time when done correctly. And funders do understand that, but what they need to see is forward movement, authentic movement, and change. So self-evaluation and discussion is another great place to start, because having internal discussions with your organizations about where everybody's at is extremely important. If one person is very gung-ho about doing this work and they want to jump right in, but they have several board members that actually are opposed to doing it, you immediately have a roadblock. So you need to know first and foremost internally where your barriers may be in your own board and in your own staff. And then there's plenty of resources out there to convince them or show them how this is going to be good for your mission and your organization overall. So you can participate in cohort programs. There's a bunch throughout the state. One that is particularly good that I like to share is called Walk in Their Shoes. It's offered by the Western Connecticut sister branch of the Cultural Coalition. And there's trainings online, specifically Americans for the Arts. And again, these are all active links in red That's the link directly to their webinar page specifically for DEI. And again, even though it is focused on the arts, 99% of the information can be tailored to whatever your mission or your organization may be. And then individual research and growth, making it a priority for everybody as individuals to just continue learning and continue reading and listening to recordings and things like that. All right, so moving on to competition. Funders have missions too, and what are they looking for? Again, it's no surprise that the first one is their DEI. They are looking for cultural competency. They are looking for people who are having genuine conversations about how to reduce barriers, how to become more equitable, how to become more inclusive, how to serve those underserved populations, and how to raise up those voices that we may have not heard in the past as much. Second, overall, their evaluation and adaptation. They want to see that you are self-evaluating. Are you synthesizing what you learned during programs, and are you adapting and making change based on your self-evaluations? Are you even asking for feedback from your patrons and from your participants when you do programming? Partnerships and collaborations. So the easiest way to break down silos is through partnerships. They want to see that you are reaching out and thinking outside of the box on how to maximize your impact in the community. So instead of just serving your one audience, are you partnering with an organization that you can then expand and grow your programs and just raise up both of your missions and raise up the importance of both of your programs? So collaboration is always a key piece that funders are looking for. And then of course, fiscal responsibility. Is your operating budget clear? Does it accurately reflect the financial needs of your organization? And are the funds allocated appropriately to support your mission? And just so you know, this whole presentation will be sent after. You're welcome. So when we're talking about that financial security, I always want to start from the very beginning, and this may be old hat news to many of you, but for some people it may not be. Diversifying your financial resources is always going to be your key. So grants are fantastic, individual donations are fantastic, sponsorships, we talk about earned income. People ask me, well, what should I be focusing on? And the short answer is everything. You need to have a little of everything because one serves they bolster and boost each other. So this, for example, is contributed income. Two forms of contributed income that you can have are grants and donations. So if you are applying for a grant for a first time and you've never applied before, grantors may look to see how much money you've secured in individual donations, because that's kind of the stamp of approval from your community saying that this is a worthwhile program. If you already have received a grant, again, an individual donor may look at that and say, wow, this foundation has stamped you as being okay, then you must be safe and secure for me to give my hard-earned money to support that mission. So they support each other. Grants can provide larger funds typically, average grant awards for regional banks is between $3,000 and $5,000. But on the opposite side, donations are typically unrestricted. So you can use individual donations to keep your lights on, pay your staff. Everybody needs operating money. And that's what those individual donations, unless the donor has restricted it to a certain program or a certain aspect of your mission, then it's unrestricted income. Again, finally, grants can be more dependable as an income source compared to donations when you have the fluctuation in people's, income year over year. But if you form those close bonds and relationships with your donors, then actually you can usually increase their donations over time if you spend that time working with them. People usually try to focus on one more than the other, saying, oh, well, grants is a lot of paperwork. And yes, grants, you have follow-up reporting to do. You have due diligence. You have to fill out your final report. You need to say thank you to your funder. But on the opposite end, donations may be less paperwork, but don't be fooled, because if you want that donation year over year and you want them to come back, you have to form relationships with them. You have to have touches throughout the year. Thank you letter, not just in their thank you letter for their money, but please come to our event. This is what's happening. We'd love to see you here, things of that nature. So it's relationship building. So earned income sources. Earned income sources are things such as your program revenue, tuitions, membership fees, merchandise sales. They are things that people are purchasing. And that is the difference really between contributed income and earned income. okay? And you should be developing both sides. So corporate sponsorships, because the business is purchasing marketing, it is considered a source of earned income. Chelsea Groton also has sponsorships, okay? It's a separate application and they typically support your events that you might be having and things like that. That's a typical sponsorship. Also member fees. A lot of times we see memberships to museums or theaters or things like that, and they list those as contributed income, but memberships are earned income. They are buying something for their membership. It is not a feel-good donation that just supports your mission. They are buying a specific seat in your theater or advanced sales or a discount or something overall. So it is an earned income source. So is your organization ready for grants? These are things that you should just have in place before you even think to start applying for a grant, because it will make your life tremendously easier as you go along. And a lot of grant questions are the same. They're phrased slightly differently and you always have to tweak to adjust to the specific question. But if you have these pieces in place, you will save yourself hours of time in the draft. Wendy Berry, the executive director of the Cultural Coalition, always says the first grant of the year takes her 8 to 10 hours to do, because it's that year's goals, objectives, the updates on their programming. She spends a tremendous amount of time on that first grant, and then everything gets copy and pasted from that grant and tweaked and adjusted to the next application. So you need to have your mission statement and programming outlined and clearly with a description, how you're evaluating each one. These don't have to be long sagas. It can be one-pagers, you know, a shorter long-range plan. Again, the old way of looking at a strategic plan, that is this massive document that sits on the shelf and collects dust and no one looks at, completely by the wayside. Okay, COVID has obviously flipped us all upside down our heads. So you need to have a plan, but it needs to be fluid and living and something that you actually utilize. So having a conversation with your board to just say, what are we doing for the next 6 months? What's our focus? How is that going to feed the next 3 years? And putting that down on paper is important. And then your financial statements, if you're a fledgling organization and you don't have, you know, your CPA or anything like that, and you're not having formal financial statements, then you always have your 990, and that's fantastic. Or at the very least, you need to have an Excel spreadsheet that has your income and it has your expenses, and your income's broken out into contributed and earned, and your expenses are broken out into your overhead and your staff and things like that. So the narrative form of a budget is not acceptable. You need to have it as in spreadsheet form. And I am actually going to provide you with a template for an organization budget, if you don't have one, that can give you those line items that you can manipulate, but it just is a good framework to use. Obviously, your board list. And does your board operating according to your bylaws? Are they giving time, talent, and money? Does the diversity of your board reflect your community? So that's a tricky one right now, for sure. Obviously, we just talked about being ready and DEI. So if you are a New London-based organization that serves underprivileged youth and your board is all white males over 65, you have a problem, okay? And that's a problem that many organizations have, and that's okay. The first point is knowing that it's a problem. If you don't have those voices on your board, reaching out and saying, we want to hear from you, how are we doing? And then eventually making a long-term commitment to turning over some of the board to be more reflective of your community. And then capacity. Do you have the capacity and time to complete a competitive grant application? A lot of times I see people that are, I'm going to go in for an NEA grant, a National Endowment for the Arts grant, which is a federal grant, and they may have done 1 or 2 bank grants. And I have to say, do you have 45 to 50 hours to dedicate only to this application? And then if you get it, do you have the staff capacity to follow up with all the evaluation and reporting needed to secure that money? And a lot of times the cost benefit analysis, because your time as staff is worth money. If you're spending 40 or 50 hours to do an NEA application and it's highly competitive, that time could have been spent maybe applying for a local bank foundation or maybe recruiting some individual donors. That would have been a much better cost benefit So those are things that I can chat with you through, and we have some staff or some executive directors that really are gung-ho about making their staff do it, and I'm more than happy to come in and be that bad guy to say, I really, in my professional opinion, I don't think that's the right approach. And sometimes it helps to have that outside voice. So, and you might not be able to see it, but in the margins it says grants are competitive at every level. So having these in place really is a time saver, and it gives you that essential verbiage that you're going to use in all your proposals. And you can hone it and fine tune it and have other people look at it, and that's important. So where to find them and how to approach them. Everybody wants, what's new? Where can I find grant funding? Where can I find grants that are going to be good for my organization and my program? So there's a lot of free services out there that I steer people to, rather than going to the massive foundation directories and paying for memberships for database services, which can be very expensive. First of all, your local libraries typically have a foundation directory subscription. So if you really want to go that route, then just allocate some time and sit with the computer at the library and download and print off any prospects that you may be able to search up from that. But there's a ton of free services. There's the Cultural Coalition has things that come up in their monthly newsletter. They always send out anything that's relevant to the cultural community. But bank foundation directories, Bank of America has a great foundation directory that's specific to their donor advised funds, which is funds that they manage. I'm not sure if Chelsea Groton has anything comparable.
I don't think we do, no.
But they have fantastic grants. So, and the Department of Economic and Community Development actually has a listing of some grants on their website as well. And you should always follow your funders on social media so you can get their updates. They sometimes, especially now, post-COVID, a lot of foundations and funders are rolling out either new applications or they're shifting their funding priorities. So where you might not have been applicable before, that landscape is changing a little bit. So it's good to stay in touch. You also want to look inward. Your board members and the people who are participating in your programming is your best connections to grant opportunities. So if you have a board member and they work for Pratt & Whitney, guess what? Pratt & Whitney has some great foundation and grant monies, and they sponsor a lot of stuff. Dominion has fantastic grant opportunities. So you want to look inward first. You can even send out a message to your membership, people that come to your programming and say, we're always, just a reminder, we're always looking for new grant opportunities. If your business or organization has one, please let us know. That gets your foot in the door, which is always the first step. So start small and local. If you've never received a grant, try a local bank foundation or a sponsorship. Sponsorships are your dip your toe in the water. They're a level kind of under grants. They're easier to apply for. They typically have less money, maybe $1,000. They're usually to support events or one-time kind of happenings, and they're to make big splashes, but the reporting is usually a lot simpler too. So if you've never done a grant before, sometimes a sponsorship might be a good starting point. And then your bank foundations are, like I said, are also great. So, and there's just a couple of the banks listed in this region that have fantastic grant opportunities. Investigate your target. So don't ever just submit an application without checking first to make sure that their guidelines and funding priorities line up to your mission. Okay, you need to look at the FAQs on their website. Chelsea Groton has a phenomenal FAQs page, which will answer 95% of any questions that you may have. So just be respectful of the staff's time. Everybody is spread thin these days. So, look at those FAQ pages, make sure if you have a question that's not answered, by all means, reach out. And I even encourage people to reach out anyway, introduce yourself, introduce your mission and your program, and explain what you'd like to apply for, and they will steer you typically in the right direction. They will say, well, that doesn't seem like it might fit our funding priorities, or that's a great fit, go for it. So we always encourage people to reach out. And just a heads up that the Cultural Coalition always offers a funders panel every fall, and we actually sit down with, Chelsea Groton's been there historically for the past couple of years, the Eastern Connecticut Community Foundation. So we actually have the grant managers from all of the go-to places in this region come and be on a panel, and they give all those little tidbits of, to get your foot in the door and give you a competitive edge, what you might want to know. And it's really interesting because there's some people like the Lord Foundation. Catherine Lord is one funder, but she flat out said, if I give you money and you do not send me a thank you letter, you will never get money from me again. If you call me, I don't want to hear from you. I want the letter of intent, just like it says on the website. Vice versa, we have the Eastern Connecticut Community Foundation, and Jen O'Brien says, call me, please, before you do anything, just call me. So you kind of get those little tidbits of how to make sure you're approaching people correctly. So, and then, like I said, make the call. The grant officer is not your enemy. Chat them up, explain your mission, and they will help you, guide you. And you want to always be passionate about what you do and your impact on the community. So, does the program fit the grant? Square pegs and round holes. You never want to sacrifice the integrity of your program to fit the funding priorities of a grant. Not only is it going to be really obvious to anyone reviewing your grant application, but you're not staying true to your own personal mission. However, there are times where the funding priorities are really going to make you stretch and think outside the box about ways that you should be partnering, opportunities that you might be missing to be more equitable, ways to reach new audiences and adapt. So just because it's not an immediate fit, you do want to take that moment and just think about, is there a way that we could be doing this and bolstering our own programming and then making it a more fundable program? And you always want to keep an open mind, but be aware of where you're headed. So if you're going down that rabbit hole and you're changing your program and you're changing everything to accommodate the funding priorities, it's not going to be a great fit. All right, so your general rules of grant writing. Your job is to make it hard for them to say no. There are various ways in which we're going to go through each one of these in detail. So the technical writer, you have to be both. The data drives your points home and the emotion connects the reader to your mission and its impact. So you really have to be both, and that's hard because usually people are stronger in one area than the other. You have to answer the question. And I know that sounds extremely simple, but 9 times out of 10, the reason people do not get the maximum score on a rubric for a question is because they missed answering an aspect of the question. I hate to say it, but artists are the biggest culprits of this. They are incredibly emotional, fantastic speakers about their work. You get sucked right in, you want to give them money, but then they don't answer the question because they get drawn into their work and the passion behind it. And so I love working with artists in particular because it's never hard to pull emotion from them and their writing. Multi-pronged questions are usually the reason why this is an issue. People, foundations and grant applications are famous for asking 8 things at once. So when you have a question and it's 6 lines long, 9 times out of 10, they're asking multiple questions, and you have to be sure you're answering all the aspects of the question so you can get full credit for the answer. And you always want to use their words right back at them. So you have to remember that a grant reviewer is sitting down with a stack of applications that they're allocated to review, all within an hour. And usually they give reviewers 15 minutes to read each application, and you set yourself a little timer and you go. You want to make it really easy for them to check off the box. Are you hitting your funding priorities? Did you answer this question? So by using the words in your application from the website, from those funding priorities, you're making it really easy for them to check that box off and not have to dig through your narrative. And also you want to try not to be long-winded. Be emotional, but be direct. It's a balance. Just like in dating, confidence is a good thing as long as it's mixed with a touch of humility. So don't be scared to brag about your organization, especially if you're doing great work. It's fantastic to let people know and give yourself a little pat on the back. But if you have struggles, you're obviously coming to them for money for something. So you want to make sure that you're balancing that with saying, we're doing a great job, but we have needs still, and we could really use your help. And that's where that kind of balance comes into play. Don't show a picture of desperation or provide general information. Funders really want to be the saviors of a sinking ship. Rather, they want to know how your program is going to make an impact and fill an essential need. Remember, they have funding priorities too, and they have missions that they're serving. Then finally, those character limits, they are always with spaces. So just make sure you're watching out for that. That is the worst thing when you're typing along and you realize that you're not looking at those spaces. And presentation matters. You know, you're back in high school, just make sure that your fonts are all the same, your margins are all the same, you're not abbreviating things or having things in different, you know, bold and italics and things like that. All right, so we're gonna break each one of these down, being the technical writer and the emotional writer. So you wanna tell a story. You're gonna introduce your argument and your main players, you're gonna outline your issue, and you're gonna connect it to the larger world of your community, eliciting emotion and driving it home with your data. It should really flow like you're telling a story. You also wanna make sure you're keeping your voice as a writer. So if you're lifting data from the web, make sure you are tweaking it to fit the narrative that you're writing and you're not just plopping it right down in the middle of a paragraph, because that is going to be blatantly obvious to the review, and you want to be aware of using that jargon, unless you're defining your words away. So let's look at an example of what I mean. So this is a grant question that has been posed, and it's a very typical question. What need will your project address? So this organization prides itself on our ability to adapt, shift, and respond to the needs of our community. Therefore, when the pandemic hit and our organization temporarily shut its doors, we didn't miss a beat. Our staff, utilizing our current laptops, shifted to working from home, and within weeks, our programs moved to virtual platforms. Now, almost a year later, when over 96% of arts and cultural organizations across the country have canceled events, 37% have made either temporary or permanent reductions in staff, and in Connecticut, nonprofit organizations have suffered a $4.5 billion financial loss. Our organization has remained steady. We've retained our staff, continued to offer our programming both virtually and in person when feasible. The organization has survived and will continue to survive and flourish because we listen to the needs of our community, we adapt, adjust, and grow, always remaining relevant. However, this does not mean we are without need. During this time, we have pinched pennies to ensure our fiscal stability. We are faced with a dire situation where the tools we rely on 100% to function are crashing. Our laptops no longer hold a charge, they can't perform updates, and they struggle to work with various applications and softwares that we use on a daily basis. Therefore, our organization is requesting assistance to address this immediate need. So you can kind of see, one, it's a story. Two, I want to help these guys. You know, and that's what you're trying to elicit. They're doing the hard work. They're making the hard choices. I want to get them to the finish line. I want to make it so that they can continue doing this work. This is what you're trying to elicit from a reviewer. You're using data in an appropriate way. You're balancing the emotion with the technical aspects of it. You're showing that there is a need, but it's not a sinking ship. So this is just an example, because it's hard to talk about it without showing it. So this is an example of what would be a really effective answer to this question. So breaking it down, we're going to answer the question. This is a typical question. Provide detailed information about how activities will address the stated need and intended impact, include the number of individuals served, the hours the participants will be involved, if it's a request for project support, if it's new and existing, and please only in 300 words. Thank you. So it is really, really easy to just start writing and take off and then get 375 words in and realize that you've left out half of the question, the answer to the question, and now you're backtracking and cutting and editing. So a very easy and quick trick to make sure that you don't get in that hole is immediately underline the stuff in the question that you need to focus on, bullet it out, just as I have right here, and then give yourself a framework of how you're going to answer it. So right off the bat, I'm saying this is the need, this is the impact, and these are the project details. So when I start writing, I can fill in each of those categories, making sure that I'm answering the question completely. I'm making it really easy to find the information that they need because it's bolded and italics, and I'm making sure that I'm not running away with a thought and leaving anything to chance. All right, so when it comes to project details also, you really need to be specific. Being general is gonna kill your application in the water pretty quickly. So you never want to come to a funder and say, this is our idea, this is our concept, this is what we'd like to do. That's not a fundable program. Your fundable program is, my project is going to run for 8 weeks. It's going to be 2 hours a session, 16 hours total, 100 members are going to be served. We're going to market to this population. These are the partners I've already secured. It's not a concept, it's an actual project outline. So you need to bring it from concept to outline if you haven't already. And again, you do want to brag a little bit. That's always important. So using their words back at them. These are the funding priorities, and I always like to pull a funder in the region, someone that you guys are familiar with. Again, this is CFEX, their Southeastern General grant that actually just closed the other month. So these are their funding priorities. So if I'm responding to the narrative questions in this application, guess what words I'm going to make sure are woven through that entire application. If my program is focused on youth, I'm going to empower youth. I am going to say how I'm serving lower income communities. I'm going to say how I'm collaborating. I'm going to talk about how I'm promoting systems changes. Again, if you're not doing it, don't say it, but you can look at this list of their funding priorities and kind of highlight the areas that, yeah, I'm doing this work, yes, and make sure that you're using these words in your narrative. All right, showing confidence. It's okay to brag a little bit. This is an example of how we can brag a little bit. So our org is 19 years old, Arts Center with a mission to provide a nurturing environment for artistic creativity and development through educational fine arts programming and events for all ages. This mission is evident from the moment you enter, from our abundant art store, open studios, display of local art by students and seasoned artists, one-of-a-kind sculpture wall, and our expansive selection of supplies. Our classes and summer camps and workshops and community partnerships make us a hub for town activity with offerings for all ages, incomes, and abilities in over 20 art forms. Everything about our organization nurtures an atmosphere of inclusiveness, acceptance, spontaneity, creativity, allowing our students to let their artistic ability shine, and it works. In the past 2 years, 5 of our students have won the National Ceramics Competition, where over 1,100 pieces were submitted, but only 100 pieces selected nationally. This makes our organization an official award-winning studio. So they're definitely bragging a little bit, but you can see from this, and I bet you guys can tell me, what are some of the funding priorities for this organization that they're working with? You know, go ahead.
The atmosphere of inclusiveness, acceptance, spontaneity.
Right. They want to make sure that you're being inclusive. That's a priority for them. They want to make sure you're serving all ages, you know, that you're accommodating people. And this is obviously for an arts program and an arts grant. So you can see the way that you can kind of raise up your organization and not make it sound fake. This is genuine. They're genuinely proud of the work that they do. And that's the kind of emotions you want to elicit in your application. So being specific. Will the reviewer be able to understand the project clearly? Remember, they know nothing about you or your organization or your work. Do you elicit excitement so the reader genuinely wants to see the project realized? Are you providing a clear program outline and not a program concept? Answering the who, what, when, where, and whys, whether they ask it or not. So it is common that you may see a grant application that asks certain questions and none of the questions are, you know, tell me about your program. I've seen plenty of grant applications that it actually doesn't ask you to talk about your program. You have to find a way to tell them that information because they forgot to ask it. And it's very important that they know. So that's a common thing. So as you're going through your grant applications, if you see that there's a who, what, when, where, or why that hasn't been asked, in your brain, you need to weave that information into another answer. Don't save the best for last. You know, your old high school thesis writing needs to be kind of thrown out the window in this regard, where you do your introduction and then you make your argument, you give your 3 examples, and then you drive it home at the end with that great conclusion. Conclusion first, okay? Again, these reviewers have a lot of reading to do. They're reading a lot of applications all at once. You save it for the last paragraph. They are already skimming, okay? Don't save your best points for the last line. You make them up front and hook them in. And always ask someone outside your organization to read your grants. And part of the funding boosting program, it allows my time to be utilized to do that for free. through the Funding Booster program, and it's free membership to become, to sign up for that program. And it allocates an hour of my time to be able to just open your application, read it in a Google Doc. I add a bunch of comments and tweak things for you. And if not me, that's fine. But even if you bring it home and have a spouse read it, or someone else in your community or your organization, I try to say have someone not in your office read it, because they know your organization, your programs. You want that kind of outside perspective as best you can. So these are some very common questions that you're going to come across in applications. Your outcomes and evaluation questions. And these are just a few examples pulled from various grants throughout the state. Describe your anticipated results. What difference will this program make to your community? How will the success be defined and measured? What tools are you using to evaluate? Your expected activities and their benefits. So you want to make sure that your evaluation tools, which evaluation is extremely important, especially in the past year, everyone wants that data to know how you're making that impact. You need to keep it really simple. What can you as an organization actually follow through to provide? Because if you throw the kitchen sink in the application and you get the grant, guess what you're going to have to report on in your final report? So if it's completely unachievable, it's not going to look good when you have to go back and say, oops, I'm sorry, I didn't do any of that. Okay, so you want to be upfront and honest. Or funders know that the capacity of individual organizations, especially when they're small, is limited. So make it clear, we do what we can, we do the best we can. We're open to suggestions. If there's something that we should be doing that you as a funder would like to see, please reach out, let us know. You need to be able to be open to having that conversation. But the biggest thing is to just keep it really simple. So I just wanted to take a quick minute to discuss what are some simple evaluation techniques that you can be using. Google Analytics is fantastic. If you don't have Google Analytics, it's fairly easy to add it to your website. You can track who's on your website, what pages are they opening, how many hits you're getting. If you do an e-blast, how many opens are you getting? If you're doing virtual programs, how many times in the past 6 months did people watch it? That's all great data. If you're doing a program in a specific community and you don't want to do the highly offensive standing in the back of the room and counting how many people in your BIPOC population there are, you can always go online and look at the data for the makeup of that community via zip code analysis, and it will give you a breakdown, and you can base it on that. So there's tons of things that you can be doing. And from the participants that are just here, do you guys have anything you want to hop in and share? Or if you're online, you can type it into the chat. Is there an evaluation tool that you use that you absolutely love, that you think would be viable for other organizations?
Can I do something different?
Yeah.
So we have a data intake form, which I'm actually hesitant to give out because it asks for, are you in such a bracket for your finances, and what base are you? And I'm really reluctant to hand it.
Well, that's a great question. So the question was, if people online didn't hear, is there's a data collection form that really digs into people's finances and their racial breakdown and things like that. And it's an uncomfortable place to be to ask people to complete it. So usually at time of registration, if you have programming, that's a fantastic opportunity to link that in and do it. But I have to say that you can always blame it on the funder too. We need to collect this information for our funding. And that makes it sometimes easier to get by and have to do that, but we all have to get more comfortable asking those questions. And that's just the reality of it. And you're going to see, for those of you who may have been awarded the Connecticut Humanities Cultural Fund monies or any of the COVID relief funding, guess what? All that came from the federal government, and the federal government has no problems making you answer those questions, so you better start asking them. And that's why I say blame it on your funder. So, yes, it's uncomfortable, but it's an uncomfortableness we all have to kind of move beyond, unfortunately. So understanding outcomes versus outputs. An output is how many people have attended your event, how many tickets were purchased, how many seats were filled, the numbers behind your program. An outcome is how much you as an organization or as a program moved the needle on the larger community issue you were working towards. So in your brain, and I refer back to these definitions myself frequently, because in the moment you'll start answering one and realizing that you're not answering the right one. That also happens with goals and objectives. Everyone has kind of a different understanding of what a goal is versus an objective versus an action step. So, you know, just make sure that you're being consistent. Goals are overarching, your objectives are supposed to support your goals, but be more time-driven and more short-term. So those are just the differences of those two things. And then we all love to talk about the money questions, because we can't forget our budget, but the budget is a huge part of your application. If your budget does not support and speak to your narrative, it is an immediate red flag to a reviewer that these are not working in tandem and that there's a missing link here. So your budget really needs to speak to the narrative in the application that you're providing. So some sample money questions are: how would you secure the remaining funding or modify the program if partial award was approved? What other steps have you taken to money? What alternative plans have you made in the event you don't get the full amount? So this is another place where your confidence is key, as long as it's mixed with some humanity. And this is just a little blurb that can drive that home. So this program cannot operate without these needed funds, but we have successfully raised the funds needed for programming for 10 years. We're committed to securing what is needed. If they're not received, the program will be postponed or reduced in scope until the funds are identified. So you're saying, yes, you're right, we're short. You know, we're going to come up short financially, but we've been doing this a long time and we've been around a long time, and this is no challenge that we're not used to facing. Anyone who has an organization that's sitting in this room or online that has survived COVID and still here, you know, we know how to do this. So you need to give them confidence that, don't worry, it's going to happen. And then always, if for some reason it doesn't happen and you get funded for a program and then the program does not occur, you just need to pick up the phone and have a conversation with them. Typically, they don't ever want to give the money back. So if you're reasonable with your request and your shift, typically a funder will work with you, as long as you're not saying, I'm just going to keep it for 3 years, and then it has to be within a reasonable time frame, reasonable adjustments, but they don't want to give the money back. They don't want you to have to give the money back. So we're going to go over an actual budget template. But just again, to drive home, you're separating your contributed versus your earned income and in kind. In kind is an animal all of its own, and it's the one piece that small organizations typically forget to account for. I work with a lot of volunteer-run organizations, and none of them have in their budget the time that they are contributing as a monetary value. And that could triple, quadruple your budget if you were really taking into account the monies in which you needed to have. If you need some more paper, here, use mine. Just take from that.
I didn't want to bother you.
No, it's okay.
Oh, I got a couple of that.
Oh, you
Chelsea Grattan one.
See, I said they probably have Chelsea Grattan notebooks. I knew it.
Thank
All
you.
right. So your project budget should show a real picture of your program expenses. A lot of times I'll look at a budget and they'll have, you know, if they're bringing in an independent contractor to do this work, and these are my supplies, and I'm renting a facility for this, and that's my budget. That's not your budget. You have staff time that's going into this that has to be allocated. You typically will look at how you can do that in a reasonable way. You have overhead that's going into this. You're getting food donated. You're getting volunteer staff time donated. That's your full budget. And then your project budget bottom line goes from 10,000 to 30,000 because you're accounting for the full scope of your program, and you're only asking for 5. So now your ask is a drop in a much larger bucket. And that, you know, feels a little bit better to funders sometimes. So are your line items clear, or are you expenses kind of mixed into one category? You want to try to make sure, you know, that the miscellaneous income or expenses, very small numbers in those lines. They shouldn't be whopping numbers. That's a huge red flag. If they are whopping numbers, go into your QuickBooks, figure out exactly what those expenses are, and make line items for them. Matching grants. Can you use in kind? Where are the matching funds coming from? So 90% of the grants you're going to apply for require matching funds. So that means you have to front some of the money in order to match what you're getting from the grant. So again, in that example, your project budget is $30,000, you're applying for 5, and they want you to show that you're going to front the other 5 if it's a one-to-one match. You can usually use volunteer time to account for 25% of that required match. There's always a percentage usually. And since post-COVID, a lot of funders are even increasing what you can use in towards in-kind for that match. I've seen ones go as high as 1-to-1, that you can literally have your entire match come from donated stuff. You want to typically zero out your project budgets. So that means that all of your income and all of your expenses for your program should zero out and net zero. But your operating budgets should show a surplus if you have them. If they don't and you are in a big deficit, you want to make sure that you're explaining. If no budget narrative is required with the grant, again, work it into the narrative in some way, because that's going to be a red flag if they see that you're operating in a huge deficit and you haven't mentioned anywhere how you're going to handle it. But typically, the old days of nonprofits really needing to just be, bottom line zero, those days are again gone and out the window. We know that we need to be able to be in financially healthy positions to survive what comes our way, i.e. shutting down for an entire year or not having audiences return, post-COVID. So they want to see that you have that surplus or cash reserve or savings of some kind. All right, so actually I'm going to click on this example. And if you, I was going to say it should open up an Excel spreadsheet for you guys. Oh, not for you guys. Probably because it's through the
through Google.
That's okay. So I will send this to you guys and you'll see it post-workshop. But essentially it just gives you line items to understand your contributed income and some sources of it, your earned income and some sources of it, and your in-kind. So your volunteer time, you can use minimum wage as an hourly rate to account for your volunteer hours. In-kind always goes in your income and it gets backed out in your expenses. So it goes in and out, and that's how you account for in-kind. All right, so its sole function is to just help represent the full program, and it will drive up the overall bottom line, okay? So if you have income coming in as volunteer hours in your expenses, you have two things you can do. You can either just put a line item for in-kind and back out that same amount, or you can itemize where that in-kind is coming from. So you have people time that's been donated, you might have supplies that have been donated, you might have a facility that's been donated. So you might want to put that in-kind in each of those line items, or again, you can just back it out straight from the expenses. And that's kind of what I've done. And the example is sprinkled it throughout the relevant line items, and also shown that for your expenses, your administrative and staff salaries, because again, that's the realistic pictures of your programs. You as staff are running the programs, so your time should be accounted for in here. Should it be your whole salary? No. You need to look at your programs for the year and decide what is a healthy and appropriate percentage of the whole that you can charge to this program.
So what in terms of salary goes into direct expense and what goes into overhead expense?
Yep, so your overhead expense, I would say, would be just your rent, your utilities, and things of that nature. Your administrative expense is people, and that's how I would split it out. So yeah, as you can see, I'm glad you guys got it. Oh, you didn't get it. Okay, you were definitely good. You were just being great.
No.
No, it's okay. So yeah, your administrative lines is going to be your human resources, and then your overhead and rent could be your obviously your rent and utilities and things of that nature. So if you have a program that's going to take 3 months of your staff time, and in that 3 months you're going to spend half of your time running this program, then in your brains you work out a percentage that's okay, that's going to be 10% of my overall salary, 10% of my overhead for rent and things like that. And make sure you're keeping your own notes. So if the foundation comes back and says, hey, how did you come up with this number? You're not like, I don't remember. It was midnight and I was trying to get the grant in and I just put a number in. So always have that legal pad with all your scribblings on it, or have an Excel spread where you just keep the notes for yourself. And so you can always refer back to it. So this is a good example of a general budget template for a program. All right, so some helpful hints that we can look at. Again, we talked about formatting. Formatting does matter. Being consistent, your spelling and grammar, all that good stuff. Most applications are submitted online. Do not make the mistake of filling out your application online only and working within the online application. Copy and paste all of the questions and words and character limits into a Word document, save it offline, work in it offline, and then when you're ready, you copy and paste everything back in. It is the most awful feeling when you have spent so much time perfecting an application and it is not auto-saved and you lose it all. It's just the worst feeling in the planet. Everybody does it. And everybody, it's happened to everybody. And your time is precious. So yeah, sometimes it takes a long time to create those templates for yourself. I make one every year for Challenge America for the NEA, specifically for funding booster participants that I send them so they can just jump in and start working. But it might take you an hour to copy and paste all that information over. But my God, if you lose it, it's gonna save you. It will be your lifeline.
The site that I was on, their site crashed.
Yeah, and that happens. Sites crash.
Yes.
Yep, especially if you're getting close to that deadline
Yep.
moment, and everyone's trying to go in and copy and paste their stuff in or work in it, and the system can't handle it. That happens a lot, especially with the Connecticut Office of the Arts applications, because everyone does it. The whole state's going in at the same time, and they can't handle it. So otherwise, you might lose your work. Always have another set of eyes look at it for inconsistencies. Sometimes you're just too close. You know, you've been working on it for a week, going back and forth and rereading and reading, and you can miss something very blatant that someone else would catch. If anything is left unclear, don't leave your reviewer with doubt. Include a cover letter if you really can't find a way to work it into your narrative. Sometimes the online applications always allow for additional attachments. Write a cover letter, write an explanation if you really couldn't find a place to add it in, but make sure that you explain something that's being left. And then are all the attachments included? You know, typically you have opportunities to give that emotional pull with a photograph or a brochure. Use that up. If you have one attachment that you can provide, make sure it speaks volumes, especially if the character or word limits in the questions have been really restrictive and you haven't been able to add any of that emotion in because you just can't fit it, which happens sometimes. You want to use that additional attachment as your emotional opportunity. And then if you get the award, that's fantastic. Don't forget to send them a thank you. You have to thank your funders. Acknowledge them on your website and all of your marketing. Make sure that however you said you were going to bolster them and acknowledge them, that it actually happens. And then you want to keep the invitation or the relationship positive. You want to make sure you let them know when you have an upcoming program. Invite them, send them an invitation to something. You know, you don't have to comp them for things that cost money, but you're keeping them aware that you're thinking of them, you appreciate what they've done, and you're showing them that, hey, the program did happen. See? Here's the brochure, here's the ticket, here's the whatever. All right, so the what if. What if you didn't get funding? You should call. You should ask if there's a scoring rubric, ask if there's comments, ask for the feedback. They will typically very easily just send it to you. And it could be something very simple as they just got bombarded with applications and genuinely liked yours and just couldn't make it work. It could be something that you never thought you'd see coming. And, oh my gosh, I can't believe you didn't include that in the application. You know, it's a learning experience. You have to take ego out of it, and you have to be able to be willing to adjust and grow. What if the program changes during the funding period? So you've gotten the money and your program shifts. That happened to all of us 2 years ago. So again, you should call and have a conversation with them. If you don't receive the other funding that you said you were going to, and again, you need to shift the program. You said you were applying to these 4 funding sources to make it a go, and none of them came through, but you did. What are you going to do? Are you going to postpone the program? Are you going to offer it? Do you have another program that's similar that you might be running concurrently that they might be able to slide their funding into that if it fits their funding priorities? It's a conversation and you can't be afraid to have them. Your key partner backs out. You know, these are all things that happen and you just can't be afraid to have those conversations. So if you don't achieve those stated objectives, you need to be really upfront about what you've learned. If you threw in the kitchen sink to your evaluation tools and you weren't able to do any of them, you need to say, wow, this was a learning experience. I thought we were going to be able to do X, Y, Z. Turns out we don't have the capacity to do this. And this is what we were able to do. This was a huge learning experience for us, you know, and you just need to own it. Yeah, I always like to say, or a global pandemic occurs and you have to shut down. So again, they don't want to take the money back, and they can typically be flexible. You don't want to make it a habit though, because it really shows that you're unreliable and that you're not planning for those contingencies. So these are some actual comments from grant reviewers from across the state for tons of different grants. But as you can see, these are things that we've talked about and we've gone through in the whole workshop, and just, you know, not clear articulation of how the project fits the funding priorities. They appreciate the data, but it was a little dry and they didn't really get, you know, wrapped up emotionally in it. The budget is really too general, have their line items speaking to their narrative. The budget would benefit if it's rooted in the community. Where's the collaboration? You know, you're just operating in a silo. You need to break them down those walls. How are you recruiting or participation? So a lot of times you'll have this fantastic project idea and have a fantastic plan, and you're going to say, we're going to get the seniors from this senior center and the youth from this school, and especially with schools, we're going to work with this school. Guess what? The school doesn't want to work with you because they are flat out right now. If you are not serving their curriculum specifically, they don't want to hear from you, okay? And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't approach them. It means that if you are wanting to work with a school, you need to first understand what are the state guidelines and the state rubrics that that teacher in that class, if it's an English class, what are they state obligated to teach those kids? How is your program satisfying that curriculum? If it's not, they don't have the time for it. They don't have the capacity to even look at it. If you're going to help them achieve a goal that they already have to do, now we're talking about a collaborative project. Okay, so a lot of times people will go into schools and just say, this is going to be fantastic, we're going to do it. And you're right, it is fantastic, but they just don't have the capacity right now to do that, unless you're satisfying one of their curricular goals. So go on their website, read their strategic plan, or look at their rubric, or look at what they're working on, attend a Board of Ed meeting, talk to a PTO. PTOs typically have grant line items for operating projects in schools. So if you have a good project and you need a couple grand to run it in a school, a PTO is a great way to get your foot in the door. You can go to the meeting and talk to the parents and, you know, help them understand how you're going to be supporting the teacher's curriculum, you know, how you've worked with a teacher to get this approved by them in advance. Now you're going to have a fundable program. All right, what else? And just a couple more. They wanted to hear more about how they were measuring outcomes. The programming is operating outside the timeline for the funding period. You know, you got to be careful. If your project is starting in January, but the funding said you're not going to get the money until the end of February, and your program can't start till the end of February, you're outside their window. So acknowledge it. We are outside your window, but the activities in which we're applying for funding don't start until March 1st. You know, you just need to make sure that they understand that. And the greatest way to learn how to improve your grant writing skills is to be a reviewer. Foundations are looking for people to sit and review their applications all the time, and you will see in one sit down exactly everything that I'm talking about. And you'll be able to pull the people will rise to the top of the pile that are kind of making it easier, and then you'll see how people are falling to the bottom that are making it harder to find those, answer those questions and find those funding priorities. So these are some sources for grants and data. They are all linked to everyone's website, so you can scroll in your leisure and check some of them out. They should be, you know, knowledgeable to most people. And yeah, that's it. I know it's a lot of information, but I really appreciate everybody staying with me till the bitter end. And that is my email with the Cultural Coalition. And again, the Funding Booster Program, there's a link in the first slide that you can go on the website and join the program if you so choose. So we have some time and, oh, we have, wow, I talked really fast. Okay, great.
Yeah, you made some great time.
So we have plenty of time for questions.
I was trying to keep up with the notes.
So we are now, I'm going to stop recording